Two, 1, 2. Ne, yo, 1, 2, 1.
And welcome to our session today. It's nice to see that room is full, and it's good to see you in Stockholm. So my name is Ashton Pofu. I'm from a company called CleanCape from Cape Town. I'm the YSPC for the finance seminar series. So without further ado, I'm not the main person today. I was part of preparations. So my duty is just to welcome the first speaker who's going to do the introductions to our session. So please feel free, enjoy, welcome, let's have the discussions. Our program will be very simple. We'll have our introductions followed by a keynote address from Franz Rogers. And then we're going to take a leg stretch. I want you to stand up and stretch a bit. And then we will have our panel coming to the front. Then we'll continue with our session. So please feel more than welcome. And it's good to see you all. So I would like to call to the stage Saroj Kumaja, the Global Group Director from the World Bank Group. So please, a warm welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I guess we also have online connection. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. First of all, on behalf of all the organizers, I have to say that I'm very happy to see so many of you here. This is a topic very close to my heart. When I came to the Stockholm Water Week last year, which was my first within a few days of taking up this job, the question I asked everyone, including my own team, why aren't we financing enough for water? Why is it that in 21st century, we still have 600 million people without basic clean drinking water? So there is something seriously wrong in the way our policies are being formulated and the way we are making choices in terms of how the public money is spent. I'll come to private money later. So clearly, the case has not been made why water is so critical, existential, and why we need to do more. And as part of that, more is not just about financing, but financing is a very critical part of more on water. So what sparked me is, how do we get the 600 million people to have basic drinking water now? It cannot wait till 2030. And I'm talking about basic. The SDGs, of course, goals are much more ambitious. We need a lot more resources to go there, and we should be working towards that. But clearly, the governments, the international organizations, and the civil society and the private sector, we are not doing enough. This is what we need to be the part of the conversation, the level of urgency that when I was briefing my new president 2 weeks back, that you have 600 million people without basic drinking water, and the World Bank financing every year reaches, on an average, 25 to 30 million people. If you put all the resources together, ODA, external ODA, public finances, all of that put together, look at the UNICEF, WHO, JMP data. We reach 80 million people. At this rate, the gap is not closing. As you know, the sub-Saharan Africa, the gap is widening. There are more people without access to clean drinking water and sanitation today than last year. What does that say about our performance? Bad. So a reminder to everyone sitting in this room, particularly those in charge of decision-making in the governments and the IFIs, we got to change the way we work. Water cannot be an add-on to the list of so many topics on development. Water has to be on top of the table. The water minister has to sit next to the finance minister, who generally sits next to the prime minister. Water minister cannot be at the end of the table. So political prioritization is what we need to really create that spark. And I'll come to fuel later. But first you need to start the fire, and you need the spark. And spark has to come from very strong, very determined leadership. And if that one thing that helps you to know, as for the World Bank is concerned, I'm very pleased to share with you that of the 5 global challenges on which the World Bank will prioritize for the coming years, water is one of those 5 challenges, which means the World Bank will double, triple, quadruple financing for water in the coming years. But we definitely want to work with all of us as part of that spark. Let's come to the fuel part, because I don't know how much time I have, but I have to do both spark and the fuel part. The fuel part is the most difficult part. Spark is good to have, but fuel is what you need to drive that process to go on, because it's not a one-day thing. And this is where I think you'll be spending a lot of time today. This is where the political economy comes in, because you have to make difficult choices. Finance minister has to prioritize. You need to have right kind of institutions to be able to fuel that process of financing water. And as we all know from our own experience, that the political economy as such in many countries where we work is very challenging, and political economy of water is far more complex. But the way to take this forward is to build that multi-stakeholder platform, is to bring private, public, civil society, philanthropic organizations, IFIs, UN colleagues, everybody on the table at the country level. And it is to really establish a very clear narrative why we need to step up and why we need to make those policy choices to be able to finance water. And I'm very happy to see globally today that more and more countries are trying to focus on what my colleague Gustavo would like to say, policies, institutions, and regulations. I think that is what you need to fuel the process of the whole financing agenda going forward. There is a word which I'm sure the organizers must have thought very carefully, the innovation in financing. And the reason why innovation is important, and I'm sure my colleagues who are going to come after me, they'll make more intelligent points, but I have to stress on this innovation element. There are many ways of defining that innovation. In the way the World Bank currently is looking at the innovation and financing space is, how do we blend private with public? So that public creates space and crowds in more private capital. The way private looks at public is element of de-risking, an element of guarantee, element of assurances that they will get the return on their capital. But that's a very narrow way of defining innovation in my view. The innovation is also about how communities manage their water resources, because they are already spending money. We got to really be smart in seeing how youth organizations, women's group, they get a lot more engaged in managing this space. How do we create, and I'm sure my colleagues will talk about it, local initiatives which mobilize resources locally, which complement the resources coming from governments, donors, bilaterals, MDBs, and so on and so forth, and commercial capital, of course. But it's very important that we talk about this big financing stuff. It is not about government, it is not about MDBs alone. Because the reality is that my mother spent more hours fetching water for me and our family than you can measure it. So it is very important that we keep in mind, we do not forget where we come from and keep that perspective in looking at the innovation, which is about community, focus on people, young people, and how do we harness that potential. In many ways, you'll talk about it. Again, I think I want to leave you those thoughts that came to my mind. I definitely did not follow the script my team had given to me, but it is very important that in World Bank, you have a champion, that we are going to push the water agenda like anything. And we want to go from X to 3X, 4X in terms of engagements, investments, financing, attention. So, but we want to work with you because many of you in the room know much more about water than we know. You have a lot more capacity, you have a lot more knowledge. So we want to work with you. And there's so many World Bank colleagues here. please reach out to them, exchange business cards so that we know you, we know how to work with you in a country, but we really want to work with you as we mobilize this new program that I was mentioning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saroj, for setting the scene. Yeah, all hands on deck. Everyone needs to come to the floor. Public, private, partnership, philanthropists to all have a role to play in terms of financing water. Next up, I would like to call Angel Cardenas. He is the manager of urban development and creative economies for CAF, the Bank of Latin America. Angel, the floor is yours, sir.
I have to start saying that it is my first International Water Week, so I'm the rookie here. But and after Saroj, I'm still wondering if I'm going to stick to the script or I'm just going to hopefully follow his path of having a great speech. Thank you, Saroj, for your opening remarks, and thank you everyone for being here and having us here. When I read the question and trying to respect what Franz and Fabiana wrote for my script. In terms of sparks and fuels, I kind of look at it from like opportunity and challenges. If we see the sector, I mean, what we see right now are very good opportunities to move forward and hopefully to increase investment, but we also see major challenges. So I'm going to try to frame my opening remarks in that context, and it will have definitely the very political component that Saroj also mentioned in his, because I agree with you. It is political will and political priorities that have to come. We have to move in the front line, the first spot of the line, this sector. Otherwise, we're never going to make it to increase the investment. So we all know water is practically everywhere. It mobilizes all economic activity, is a source of health and development in general. And we try to have this very productive perspective in terms of SDGs. So, and that's probably the first challenge we need to see. We only think in metrics. SDG6, and then we make the connection with the SDG2, SDG3, and SDG11. But it's much more about that. And I think it's, we like to say in Latin America that water is life, but we also have to acknowledge that, you know, it's management, it's complex. And I think that's where the biggest challenge is. How do we move in terms of managing the sector that it will make sense, and hopefully we will have a way to expand and spark and fuel that investment. And I think one of the answers to that is for sure assuming or using the integrated water resource management as a framework for allocation, use, and exploitation of water, but ultimately understanding that what it matters is to have good quantity and better quality of water. So that is probably the biggest challenge for us as policymakers, as a multilateral development banks, to accompany governments in that idea. The second challenge we see right now in the sector is that as we use the SDGs again as a very reductive perspective to measure our advancement, we're not doing well. I mean, right now, if we look at we're very far behind. And in Latin America, for instance, 25% of the population right now have no access to safely water. But when we talk about sanitation, that goes above 50%. We're talking about, if we have a population in Latin America, approximately of 600 million, 650 million people, we're talking about more than 300 million that today have no access to sanitation. That in the 21st century not only should be a challenge, but it should be a call to action immediately for political prioritization, and hopefully governments will need something about it. Within that space, and in order for us to promote the discussion in Latin America, we have recently published a study called Gaps and Investment Portfolio in Water and Climate Resilience in the Latin American Caribbean region towards 2030, 2040. The main objective or goal of this study was to try to quantify the amount needed in terms of the water security sector. And the main takeaway right now is that this study concludes that the region requires an estimated investment of US $365 billion. Just to give kind of like a magnitude of what it means in Latin America for those that are not from the region, one of the top 3 economies in LATAM has around a GDP of $400 to $500 billion. So this will require one of the big economies, whether it's Brazil, Mexico, or Argentina, to concentrate that investment in the sector to make it to 2030. If we look at this in a context of very fiscal, rigid budgets at this moment, what we're seeing, this is a very challenging task. Again, opportunities and tasks and challenges. This is a challenge. How we spark and fuel that financing, how we make it work, how we broaden our horizons, and hopefully we can tap into different sources of financing, because otherwise we're not going to be able to make this goal of $365 billion. Just to give you a little numbers, because we like that at multilateral development banks. We require $25 billion per year in water, sanitation, and hygiene. And we also, which means to triple the amount of current investment. So not only we have a large amount of money needed, but we need to increase that by 3 times. And hopefully, again, about challenges, our management would actually be better. So as we definitely need to increase investment, this increase in investment has to come and has to involve renewed policy frameworks to, again, enable new sources of financing and hopefully having efficient and capable institutions to come along this endeavor. I think the main point is finance and governance are interdependent. One requires the other. If we don't see that at this moment, we're not going to be able to move forward. So this study I was referring to has also 2 takeaways that I want to share with you. And here is where the opportunities come. We need to learn from previous experience. The first one, we need to take into account lessons learned from public and private participation in the past and how to provide legal and regulatory confidence. Private capital has been limited, especially in developing countries. But why? Due to different variables. One of them, and I think it's the most important, they're non-bankable projects. Lack of sustainable revenue streams. I mean, when we go on the ground and we talk to governments and we see their projects under status, they're merely ideas. We need to work to make bankable projects. And us as development banks have a major duty in that. Also, complex political considerations. I think that one, it's pretty much covered. We all know what we're talking about when we go into countries and we talk about complex political consideration. Service fragmentation, deficiencies in project design, and I think very understandably, risk adverse behaviors from investors. It is hard to also convince investors to come in when we have this environment. So we have to learn from these lessons learned. I mean, we have at least 20 to 30 years of previous experience in Latin America. Again, we're talking as a Latin American and Caribbean bank. We need to learn from there. I mean, we have lots of evidence. What hasn't worked, hopefully we have to take that into account and make it work the next round. We need to attract new players. Saraj also mentioned about blended finance. We need to bring to the table commercial banks, regional, national, and subnational public development banks, and hopefully to come together and develop new schemes that will reduce or de-risk structures. Blended finance is a promising way to work along with development finance provided by IFIs. CAF is currently leading the task force on financing from the World Water Council. And one of the reporters, again, multilateral developments, we love to talk about the reports that we publish, analyzes several case studies on blended finance. But I think what is more important about this is that we have found common attributes and constraints that might be detrimental to this financing unlocking. Again, opportunity to learn from previous experience. In addition to this, and here's an opportunity, AFD, European Investment Bank, Manobras, and CAF has launched what we call the Water Finance Coalition, which is a platform to promote knowledge cooperation among multiple public development banks with the ultimate goal of increasing capital in the water sector. When we look at the balance sheet of public banks in Latin America, something that it strikes is that it's the little amount that they allocate for water investment. They have a lot of investment in energy and in construction and connectivity, but none in water. We need to change that. But that means to talk to these banks and hopefully help them to understand the sector and to develop tools and instruments that will actually de-risk these structures and will incentivize this financing. In summary, and I'm about to close, unlocking private capital requires structures that on one hand offer returns on investment and mitigate perceived and real market risk, but we also need to have operators with sound creditworthiness, and I will add efficient capabilities. Again, governance and financing go hand in hand. Let me conclude by this opening by sharing what I think is most important for us at CAF. Achieving SDG targets seem challenging. We are all giving voluntary pledge to increase to double, triple, quarter our investments, but it's not impossible. Again, if political will exists to work in fine-tuning the enabling environment, in introducing innovative sources of financing and having well-prepared projects. I think this is where we should be working with government and public sector counterparts to develop good and sound projects that we can down the road put into a pipeline and hopefully to find innovative ways to finance. Thank you again for having me, and I wish you a great conference.
I think it's getting heated up. We're moving higher. Thank you very much, Angel, for setting the scene as well. I think the message is quite clear. Finance and governance, they go in hand, they're interdependent. For us to do better and increase investment in water, we also need to change and look into governance. We should make them progressive so that they support investment in water. Without further ado, we're going to have our keynote address. I introduce another speaker that is not new to you. I would like to introduce Van Rogers, the chair of WFC. His keynote address today is titled Opportunities of Innovative Financing for the Sector to Accelerate Financing for SDG6. Franz, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for being with us. With those brilliant introductions, I don't have too much to say in addition, but let me try to stress on some particular points. And Sarosh and Angel have mentioned about the enabling conditions that I think it's very important for scaling up financing. Also, the new innovative financing for most of us and international initiatives that are coming, and we are working on that. And just to summarize some key messages. As Sarosh and Angel mentioned, we need an enabling conditions to scale up water financing, and it has to deal with at least 4 points or 4 group of points. One is the sound investment environment, and when we are talking about that, we are referring to the national or the regional investment environment. So it has to deal with promotion, facilitation and trade, procurement, business contract, and institutional arrangement as a whole. And going through the sector, we also need to work and having water policies and regulations conducive to investment. And it refers to have sound sectoral policies, coherent regulation, that it's one of the challenges, especially in developing countries, and also well-designed incentives, especially for attracting private investment coming from commercial banks or the private participation and wealth. And we also need not only to have sound policies and good framework, we don't have capable institutions. I think it's one of the most important challenges, especially in developing countries, to have institutions that have capacity. And when we're talking institutions, we are referring to the rector, also the regulator, and also the service providers. Because if we don't have capacity, even if we have 2 or 3 times the investment we need, we are not going to be able to invest with efficiency and with the proactivity we need. So I think it's very important to strengthen institutions in the developing countries. And of course, as Angel mentioned, to have the project sustainability and borrowers capability, and to have these bankable projects, we need to increase and help the service providers in what we call the borrower's creditworthiness. If not, we are not going to be able to promote corporate loans, for instance, and we have to be just depending on sovereign loans. I mean, with the nation sovereignty as a support or guarantee of the loans. But if we want to move forward to provide loans to water operators, for instance, we need to increase creditworthiness of them. So in that case, following that, we need additional funding. And when we are referring to funding, we refer to fill the gap with the three well-known T's that most of you know: tariffs, taxes, and transfers. But I think to come up with not only filling the gap, but bridging the gap, we need financing. Financing coming from philanthropies, also from IFIs. And to bridge in the gap, we need a better utilization of existing resources. When we see some of the countries, we see that they have increased sometimes 2 or 3 times the budget. But when they are implementing that, they still keep at the same current level that they were before. And that refers to the institution's capability or capacity of them. So we need to focus and to have more capability of the existing resources we still have. And of course, to increase of financing and also mobilization additional resources. For instance, as Sarosh mentioned for the World Bank at CAF, we also have a commitment that we have presented in the last or the recent UN Water Conference in New York, that we have committed to significantly increase our financing by approving up to $4 billion between this year and 2026. So it means for CAF an increase of 67% compared to historical yearly approval. And we know that most of IFIs are doing the same. So we are making efforts to increase our focus and to increase our investment in the water sector, but we also need other allies in this crusade, I would say. And then let me go into innovative mechanisms, and we have learned, or we have listened to the green and blue bonds, and it's an interesting mechanism that it could be used by the IFIs. For instance, CAF has launched some green public bonds in the past, and we know most of IFIs are doing the same. We also have regional platforms that are doing like green, with the first green bonds found in Latin America with KfW, IDB, Life, and others to mobilize additional funding. But we could have also some examples of countries that have been launching green or blue bonds, for instance, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico in the Latin American sector. But we still have to do more, because when we see the amount or the percentage of bonds in the wash sector compared to other sectors, we see that only 7% of green bonds have been in the global market, and coming mostly from private companies, private water utilities in Latin America. We also have the opportunity to attract and gain from the climate funds, and we have 3 climate funds: the Green Climate Fund that has launched in less than a year, I think, the water security guidelines as one of the prioritized sector. And for instance, CAF has been start working with GCF with trying to have blends of loans from CAF or the multilateral, also with green climate funds. And I guess that's an opportunity also to work with Green Climate Fund, but also the nations can work directly with Green Climate Funds and other that are accredited to GCF. We have the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, that has been focused and has an area of international waters, especially for transboundary, that it's one of the complex challenges, I think, in most of countries. In Latin America, we have around 70 transboundary watersheds. So it deals with how to work together in different, with some countries in how to develop different projects that are of interest of many countries in the region. And when we are seeing that the whole picture of the world, that we have more around 300 transboundary watersheds, I think it's very complex, and we have the opportunity to attract GEF to some of these projects, to try to combine with grants coming from GEF, with loans, and try to develop some international projects. And the Adaptation Fund is also an interesting fund that can be used to leverage investment in the sector. We have to work in innovation, as I said, and we have different mechanisms, not only coming from the non-sovereign loans, but also from the sovereign loans. And for instance, we have started with programs for results, that it's an interesting way of providing loans to the countries because it supports government programs and it links disbursement directly to the achievement of a specific program results. We know that the World Bank has been working for many years in this program for results. At CAF, we are starting with those kind of projects, but I think it's interesting way, especially for those countries that are not with our medium or high income countries, that they have the budget, but they need from the IFIs to have the assessment, to have the advisory, and also to reimburse achieving different milestones. So I think this program for results is an interesting or an additional way of providing loans coming from the IFIs to the nations, followed by specific milestones that could be achieved, and it generates ownership, because if it comes from the government programs, we understand that it has the ownership of the countries, and it's an opportunity to work on. We are preparing those loans, for instance, in Colombia and also in Mexico, that could be interesting. And we have the other side from non-sovereign loans that I think it's another field of opportunities with the blended finance that Sarosh and Angel mentioned. And what is a blended finance? It's a combination of development finance coming from IFIs, climate funds, NGOs, philanthropists, with commercial finance coming, for instance, from commercial banks or from public development banks as well. So in this blend, we could combine the concessional loans coming from IFIs or grants with the commercial loans coming from those banks, and the mix, we could have interesting rates that could be used for water utilities, for instance. And we have 4 alternatives of using or having blended finance: to lower capital, providing guarantees, insurance to reduce risk, technical assistance for capacity building, or for the project preparation. And when we see the blended finance as a whole, for instance, the report from Convergence, we see that in the water sector, we have just a small piece of blended finance. So it's around 2 or 3%, or perhaps maximum 5%. And the most of the blended finance has been going to agriculture or energy. So I think it's a large opportunity to increase blended finance, and it has to deal with both sides. On one side, from IFIs and others, to try to attract public development banks or commercial banks and try to reduce risks, giving confidence, perhaps blending and giving the support to these public development banks. And on the other side, we need to work with investors to reduce the averse of risk that comes from the water sector. And we have 2 promising mechanisms that are starting in the world, for instance, the sustainability linked loans or the environmental impact bonds, that both have a common trend, that it's pay for success loans. So it's quite interesting because the retribution or the loan is according to agreed rates, but within an interval. And when the borrower exceeds the targets, we can reduce the rate, for instance. But if it's out of the interval and it's less than the minimum interval, so the rate increases. So it's a way to incentivize efficiency and to incentivize to achieve targets. And I have been working, for instance, in the wash sector with Corsan in a leak reduction program, or we have also in sustainable drainage systems in the case of DC water, stormwater. And in this case, the impact bonds could encourage efficiency or innovation, introduce the sector industry to investors, reallocate risk of failure to private investors, and to leverage private investment in the sector. So I think this is one interesting mechanism. And to be honest, at CAF, we are studying these mechanisms to work on, but we know that some others like IFC and others have been starting, and we are looking for the results of these mechanisms that could be interesting also to apply for different IFIs. We also see that there are different international initiatives that try to push on into the investment because of what Angel said, that we need to triple or quadruple the investment. So we have started, as Angel said, what we call the Water Finance Coalition with different multilateral development banks. Actually, we're going to have a close meeting during this Water Week, and on September, we're going to have a big important session as part of the Financing Common in Cartagena. And what we are trying to do, to bring together multilateral, regional, and national public development banks, that we are around 6 institutions so far, with the ultimate goal of improving water and sanitation financing. We are at this point starting with knowledge sharing, promoting good practices among us, but the ultimate goal is to increase financing and to attract, as Angel said, public development banks, I mean regional or national public development banks into the water sector. And it has to deal not only with the capacity of investment, but to understanding the wash sector and to see that it's not as riskier as they think. We also see that there are other international initiatives like Roundtable on Financing Water that was launched with the government of Netherlands, the OECD, or Water Council, and the World Bank, that has periodic sessions during the year in trying to acknowledge and to bring some good lessons from worldwide and to learn on that. And quite recently, we have the Global Commission of the Economics of Water with the purpose to make a significant and ambitious contribution to the global effort to spur change in the way societies govern, use, and value water. It's a promising commission that we have been talking to Xavier, for instance, that he's going to be part as this Global Commission as part of OECD, and we'll see the results, I think, in the next years. Let me finishing with these 3 messages. As innovation goes beyond technology, and we understand that innovation could be in the social, financial, institutional, and also in the policy making sector, and we need to work still on innovation in worldwide. Also, the innovative financing looks for harnessing the potential of investment following the global trends, as I said, with different mechanisms or different type of loans that I have presented very briefly. And also we need a support and trying to work together with international initiatives. The idea to work together with IAB or AFG is to bring lessons learned and how to leverage and also to create synergy between different IFIs. And we understand that it's not only an effort of IFIs, but it's an effort of all of us. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Franz, for the keynote address. I think we all got the 3 key messages. Innovation goes beyond technology. We are talking about innovation in financing. So thank you for taking us through the different innovative financing mechanisms for financing water. We are moving on with our program. So we'd like to maybe at this point take a leg stretch. I think we have been seated for about 45 minutes now. So as we take the leg stretch, I'll run around as a young man and prepare the stage for our panelists. So please, may I ask Carlos Punte to get ready to come to the stage. He's the head of Water, Energy and Environment Projects, Panopras, Mexico. And also Shirley Hicks is Senior Advisor, CEO Water Mandate, Water Resilience Coalition, and WASH for Work Initiative, I think, from Pacific Institute. And also Dominique Hattel, Vice President, Public Affairs for Water, Veolia. And last but not least, Thomas Panella, Director for Natural Capital and Climate Asia in the Pacific Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Sectors Group Asian Development Bank. So these are our panelists for today. So I'd like to ask you to stand up. Let's have a leg stretch, then I'll prepare the session.
So you think you must get two hand mics. So are you going to be the moderator?
No, Gonzalo is the moderator. I will introduce him now.
Yeah. Because he can have one microphone.
Yes, I think he wants to stay in the. He wants to. Oh, it's right.
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to-
Yeah, it will be here.
Moderator. Maybe one.
Okay.
Ashton. Thank you. Great. And then yeah, that's good.
There you go. We're almost ready. Tengo que agradecer a CAF que no sé, que me ayudó a
Time to
moderar,
stop
como era el
stretching
Banco
those legs,
Global
people.
Intelligence, ¿cómo es? A CAF. Con algo muy bien, no. Les digo también, dale. Bueno, te digo, no, muy bien, dale.
The only lady is in center, which is convenient and super.
Hello? Take it. So yeah, we all have. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank CAF and the World Bank
for taking ISA into account to moderate this amazing panel. So we are going to straight to the point. In the first place, we're going to listen Carlos Puente, Head of Water, Energy and Environment Project for Banobras, Mexico. Each panelist will have 7 minutes to share with you knowledge and experience regarding to financial issues and challenges. After listening each of them, we are going to open a space of debate with the audience. We will have between 5 and 10 minutes to Q&A. So let's start with Carlos Puente. We are going to ask some questions regarding to financial water in Mexico and Latin America. And in the first place, we want to know what are the measures taken by Mexican public sector regarding overall enabling environment policies, institutions, regulations to improve water sector financing framework and the financial sustainability of water companies. Thank you very much, Carlos.
Thank you. All right. Well, Mexico has definitely been traveling, a difficult road to promote and to have an efficient water sector. I would place the birth of the system that we are operating under the current environment 30 years ago with the creation of CONAGUA, 30, 40 years ago, maybe. And where we basically had a large scale structural transformation, which was aimed at resolving the big problems at that time, which was basically ensuring that the metropolitan areas had enough water, that the agricultural sector had enough water, so and that the big projects, the dams, the distribution systems were able to be built and financed. All that within the context of several economic crises that affected the country periodically. But I think that a good institutional framework was created then. Banobras is a bank that has been in the market for almost 90 years now, and we have been part of that process. Starting in the 1990s, within the bank, there was this trust fund created in order to promote public-private partnerships in the development of water projects. And we've been partnering with the National Water Commission, which is the institution that runs the water sector, in order to solve specific areas of concern within the water sector, mostly serving water public utility companies in order for them to build the wastewater treatment infrastructure that was needed in the country starting in those years. We've been very successful. We have been able to finance around 50 wastewater treatment plants in the PPP scheme. And we were talking in the morning about our new areas of intervention, which basically have to do with increasing the efficiency and the sustainability of the public utility companies through performance-based contracts. And also we have been successful in building large-scale distribution projects, aqueducts, basically, through the PPP scheme. What are we looking to do in the future? Like Franz was saying, with the outlook of the water security strategy note from the Green Climate Fund, we are looking to align our practices in order to secure a transformational water asset program with the Green Climate Fund. And basically, where Banobras perceives that we stand now, and where we think that we should intervene in the Mexican context, is in ensuring that the public utility companies operate with efficiency in order for them to be operationally and financially sustainable. What do we look to have there? So basically, what we need to ensure is that the public utility companies, which now operate under around 50% of non-revenue water production, go at least up to 75%. And we also think that we need to start a process of structural change that obligates the public utility companies to collect, the resources through through the tariffs that are, charged to the population, because right now that process is very much politicized. We are working together with ANEAS, who is here in the room. We're working together with the National Water Commission, but definitely I think that in the coming months, we're going to have change in the federal government, and this political will that CAF and that the World Bank were talking about is going to be very important and very critical to have this process of structural change, where we think we should be able, or we should need to pass law reform, specifically aimed at the public service provision in the urban areas.
Thank you, Carlos. You mentioned 3 innovative measures introduced in Mexican water sector: performing contracts or loans, large-scale programs, PPPs, and Green Climate Fund. Can you highlight some of the results of these 3 politics?
Okay, the main result from the National Infrastructure Fund's intervention in Mexico has been to have a continuous presence in financing through grant allocation that we have in Banobras, several PPP projects, more, like I said before, in wastewater treatment. So basically what those are availability projects, which are financed through fixed cost, fixed tariff that the public utility companies pay to the private operator and builder in long-term contracts, so 25 years. Like I said, we've financed around 50 wastewater treatment plants, and we will continue on with that strategy. Then the performance contracts, we managed to go to market to bid out one performance contract in Los Cabos, which will take the public utility company from a situation where the people are receiving water every 20 days to receiving it continuously with quality and with a high level of efficiency. We're going to manage to go from 50% to 75%, like I mentioned. And that was built in connection with a desalination plant that was also bid out as a PPP. That's going to contribute to the sustainability of the public utility company. In the case of the Green Climate Fund and our TWAP program, we are going to start to work with them and with an accredited agency in order to have a facility of around $600 million. It's $400 million in a loan and $150 million in grant money, and we will put, an additional money, our own resources, in order to multiply the resources available for water security projects, with the view that the Green Climate Fund is trying to help us with in the context of water security.
Thank you very much, Carlos. We will pass the floor to Thomas Panella. Thomas is Director of Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development for Asian Development Bank. And the first question is, which opportunities arise to scale up this kind of innovative financial solutions?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I want to come back to that point on the relationship between governance and finance. And I think that's critical to our program as well as pushing finance forward. In Asian Pacific, we have a huge financing gap. And if we look at it, public sector finance accounts for 90% of all water financing. So what we're really trying to do is see how can we crowd in the private sector finance. And I think we all know that these investments make great economic sense in not only WASH, but flood risk management, hydropower, et cetera. So what we're doing is looking at the enabling environment on how we can improve that. And we partnered with OECD to use a framework that they've developed that helps us assess the enabling conditions in a country for both public and private sector investment. And it's based on water security, so all sectors. And there's 4 dimensions to this. And this is one, looking at the policy framework for investment in the country overall. This would be credit markets, corporate public governance, policy coherence. Many institutions, World Bank, do these types of analysis. But then we're also looking at water policy and regulations. This is the next dimension. Are they conducive to investment? Are there market conditions? Are there policy obstacles that prevent the water sector from succeeding? Likewise, could there be complementary subsidies or other policy changes to attract investment? Basically, what you need to do is ensure that the returns from a water investment are going to be equal, if not greater, than other sectors if you're trying to bring in more money. And then the third dimension is to look at projects which are both bankable as well as beneficial for the community as a whole. So on the bankable side, the project proponents will look at this. They'll look at the business model, the risk to returns, the time of the project. But we also want to make sure if we have bankable projects that the government is involved to make sure that they are within a broader strategic investment pathway. These projects are resilient, contribute to water security or sustainable growth. And then we also look at investments as a whole, energy, transport, urban development. How do these affect water security? And so OECD and working with us has a very detailed checklist that we'll go through, and we're working on 8 countries right now. And the outcome from this, I think, will be very useful to put reform programs in place, policy-based lending, these types of things. And certainly I'm sure Xavier can tell you more about this. The second relationship between governance and finance that I think is very important, and we talked about this, is the actors within the sector and creating credit-worthy utilities. And so we've had a few cases where we've had clients who have moved from taking concessional lending, non-concessional lending, and are now taking private sector finance from ADB. I think a good example was in Vietnam. We did a project with the Biwasa Corporation that had exactly done that, taken concessional, non-concessional, but finally took private money. And I think the important part of this is we needed to provide a lot of technical assistance to get that utility to credit worthiness. With the loan, there was additional TA to work on capacity building, also improving the regulatory framework where it was operating. And this is the first case in Vietnam, developed a shadow credit rating. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think this is an area we really need to put focus to make these utilities credit worthy. We have other examples from China I could go into, but I just want to cover 2 other points quickly here. One is on innovation. And I think we do a lot of performance-based contracting and to build DBO contracting, and we are using that in the water sector quite a bit. And for non-revenue water, we're doing that in Fiji as well as other parts of India. But then coming to innovation, we worked with the Georgia Global Utilities to develop a green bond. We put in a $20 million debt anchor loan, a private sector group did, and then a subscription for another $20 million to the bond, which was 250 million. So this 40 million ADB then helps leverage the other 210 million going into the bond issuance. And we help them develop the bond and comply with the taxonomy for green bond. And actually, this was the first green bond that was done in Georgia. And so for our subscription, 30 million is for capital expenditure on assets related to water infrastructure. And then also part of the bond, 10 million of ours will go to this, is to retire previous corporate loans with a cheaper rate. So again, this was the first green bond ever issued by Georgia, and it was targeted at the water sector. So we supported them on that. I did mention the performance contracting. The last project I'd like to talk about, and I have a lot more details on this, but is the Fujian Mulan River Basin Integrated Ecological Restoration and Management Project. This was a project we did in the PRC, and the Agricultural Development Bank of China was also a partner, plus the local government. And so the problem was there was insufficient long-term investment in ecological improvement, environmental management. So what they found along the river is that they took a look at property values and, basically a hedonic approach, and found where you made these investments in environmental improvement, you had an increase. So it's basically the land value capture approach. So they created a special vehicle that had core funding from ADB plus the other project proponents. And then to encourage investors, what they would do would be have sub-projects that were focused on water supply, flood protection, wastewater management, and on then the assumed increase in the value of the land. The government then could help subsidize the returns to investors to make these types of investments. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Thomas. We have only 1 minute left. I'm sorry. Keep it, please. You highlight the impact of project carried out in Vietnam, India, China, and Georgia. Do you think that other regions worldwide, as Africa or Latin America, will be able to adopt these kind of policies locally?
Well, I think we all know that certain countries have certain capacities. And so I think it comes back to Franz's point about why capacity building is so important, is to raise the ability to do these things. But, this assessment framework, like if you don't have good, well-developed capital markets and these types of things in the enabling environment, you need to have either some policy reform programs, policy-based lending, to put those things in place. Obviously, PRC is, I think, our most sophisticated client. So, they're able to structure something around land value capture, which probably most countries couldn't do, but certainly green bonds, I think, are a good option for that.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's time to listen. Dominic Gattel, VP of Public Affairs for Water, Veolia. The first question to Dom is, can you share any relevant experience Veolia has participated in, particular related with circular economy, for instance, water reuse in northern Morocco?
Yeah, I'll go much broader than simply Morocco. We witnessed that reuse is really a serious option to consider wherever water is scarce. And we know that with the climate change hitting harder and harder, we have to come up with solutions. And one thing to realize, I think all of us, is that the climate change is not simply a bad path to go through. It's something which is due to worsen over the years, and we have to table that into our way of thinking. I mean, the current models, algorithm, values, etc., they are not fit for the future. And you were talking circular economy. I mean, we witness in my company that the circular economy is one of the adequate solutions to face that future. You pointed me towards examples of reuse, definitely in Morocco, but I'm not going to dig too much into that particular example. Altogether, thanks to the trust of public authorities around the world, in Morocco for sure, but equally in the US, in China, in Australia, we together recycle something like 1 billion cubic meter on a yearly basis. And these projects all over the world, they have common features. The first element, which may sound like the obvious, is that all the local authorities that I just named, I also wanted to pay tribute to the Namibian authorities, they haven't missed the opportunity of a, under quote, good crisis. They were able to capture that, to debrief in depth, and based on that, they've been planning for a climate resilient future. These two common features, I mean, are the ones which we need in Morocco, in Namibia, in Jordan as well, and which triggered these local authorities in the end to call on our expertise, to bring in management expertise and technical expertise. I return on the managerial and basically to the skill dimension, which is essential. It is essential for the resilience of territories. It is essential, how can I say that, in the local utilities, and something we pay quite a great deal of attention. We have a number of tools to do that, such as Veolia Water Academy. I'm turning to my colleague in the US, exactly to do that, to enhance the skills locally. And in the case of the US, we even opened this Veolia Academy to non-people which are not our staff, so that all local authority can benefit of this capacity to train and build capacity.
Okay, thank you very much, Dom. The second question is, what opportunities and challenges do you see for public-private collaboration in the water sector? And can you reflect on the various opportunities and challenges at a regional level?
Thank you. Well, of course, I mean, first I'll start with governance. It will come at no surprise to you. And yes, the MDBs have extensive experience at to craft the local environment, which enables, I mean, doing that. Something Saroj insisted upon is he didn't use the term vision. He said leadership. But I use the term vision. I mean, there must be a strong local vision of what the future of water should look like at the level of the territory. Otherwise, it's not going to fly. And equally important, that vision has to be shared with the stakeholders. Otherwise, it's not going to fly either. So the dual dimension, having a vision, that vision being supported by stakeholders. Now, it's been said already, Franz said that earlier, that yes, the finance and the governance reinforce one another. I'd like to broaden that concept a little bit, because it's finance, governance, but equally technology, innovation, people. And I just take an example, digitization nowadays. I mean, whenever, I mean, we start doing that, it's to start with basically to save money, but equally it's an opportunity to enhance the traceability, the transparency towards the municipal decision makers. And so with that single, say almost technical tool, you actually hit the governance, you hit the bottom line, you hit the empowerment of your employees. So you do everything at once. Another thing in terms of the, I mean, we make it happen at Veolia. We have our strategy, which we call the multifaceted performance. The idea underpinning that is that any project that we jump into must serve the society, must serve our client, being they public or private, must serve the planet, must serve our employees, and must serve our shareholders. And these 5 criteria have an equal weight in the way we assess the projects. incidentally, these 5 criteria is equally used to calculate the bonuses of the C-suite people at Veolia. One last element, we're talking water projects, and there is a great deal of technology, and certainly when people turn towards Veolia, they expect us to tighten the bolts, etc. But let's not forget that a water project is a social project to start with. That's something which is fundamental, and which with our multifaceted performance aligns quite well.
Thank you very much, Dom. You remark the challenge of the new skills that local utilities will need to deal with climate change, financial crisis, and other issues. If you are able to give an advice to public utilities in the global south, for instance, regarding to the skills that they will need, what do you say?
Who am I to advise you on that? It's, how can I say that? I made the case for the different aspects which must, how can I say that, gather around a water project, including the finance, governance, etc. I'm sorry to return to that, but one needs a vision, and part of that vision is how do you finance a water project. I'll come down to the bankability, which was mentioned several times this morning. A water project, of course, you have to have targets which must be well weighted. You must have the finance to cover the infrastructure, to cover the operational expenditures as well. That's quite often something which is neglected. When the tariff, that's something I'm turning towards the World Bank. The World Bank knows quite well. If the tariff cover at least the OPEX, then we can find the finance, then we can turn around the utilities. And that skill dimension comes as part of that. If basically you underpay the people, if basically the way people are being hired is not on their merits, etc., how can you think of skills? One last thing before I finish, not to be too long, is we talked about public-private partnership this morning, and it strikes me that in the water sector, I mean, being it operated by public in-house operators or private, 70% of the money goes into private pockets. It goes in the construction business, 40% more or less of the expenditures. It goes in purchasing energy, reagent, consultancy, pipes, of course, and the rest. All that together represents 70% of the water money. And so the issue is not whether the private sector is going to be involved or not, and that relates as well to the skill development. The issue is really how do you craft an interface between the two sectors that is functional, deeply functional and efficient, and that's the key to everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dom. Well, to close this panel, we are going to listen Cheryl Hicks, Senior Advisor, CEO of Water Mandate, Water Resilience Coalition, and Wash for Work Initiative. Taking into account your experience, Cheryl, which are the enabling conditions for an increased green financing?
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the organizers for the invitation and for your question, which I'll address from a private sector perspective. So to increase and fuel private sector investments in water, we need to grow the market of diverse investment mechanisms to allow a more diverse set of investors to invest in water. In a sense, we need more investment mechanisms for water that private sector investors can invest in. We hear a lot about the need for private sector investments, beyond the water sector, but there aren't a lot of investment mechanisms to invest in. And so we've looked to the climate financing journey over the last decade, where we have seen a significant increase in investment mechanisms for a diverse set of investors to invest in. Climate finance has reached $632 billion in 2020. It's a significant opportunity to look at the way climate finance has evolved for water. And that has been enabled through these innovative investment approaches and mechanisms. Private climate investments have made up half of that, and 40% of all private climate investments have been from corporations. And so what we have been looking at is the role that corporations can play in investing in water in new ways, which are also strategic to the needs of the corporations. So this brings me to the spark. So what can spark increased private sector investment in water, companies beyond the water sector? I'll spend a few minutes talking about the investment strategy of the Water Resilience Coalition, which is a CEO-led initiative of the CEO Water Mandate launched in 2020. And in this initiative, global companies have committed to net positive water impact in their own operations by 2020, but more importantly, going beyond their fences to work together at the basin level, at the source, to achieve positive water impact in 100 of the most water-stressed basins. And so for this, significant requirement, a significant investment is required. And so that is the reason that they have also committed to an investment strategy of co-investing in mechanisms, capital market mechanisms that will achieve this goal. And this is interesting and innovative because to date, companies beyond the water sector have been investing in water through philanthropy. And we all know that that has a finite limit to what companies can invest. But what we've seen in that journey of the climate finance over the last decade is that companies are investing more, and they're able to invest more through capital market structures that have a return. And so this strategy is all about identifying these capital market structures for water that these companies who've committed to investing in water can invest in, but also to work together with the water finance sector and investment managers to create the mechanisms, and this was said, I think, along the panel, that enable private sector investors, including corporations, to invest. And what we've seen is that the corporations need different sets of information from investment managers to invest. And they have different requirements around impact measurement. So there is a capacity building element here between, how corporations can invest differently than other investors, and how investment managers or different blended finance mechanisms can make that attractive for companies. At the UN Water Conference in March, we were happy to announce the first proof of concept of this strategy, where companies indeed did make their first co-investment in microfinance for water access, and we saw that they were able to invest 10x more than they would have in philanthropy by investing in this capital market structure. And microfinance is well known in the water and sanitation area, and still an important investment, we believe, to enable water access. But we've also identified an investment opportunity pipeline of about $1 billion, which includes land asset management models, which includes water reuse and sewage reuse infrastructure, MBS solutions, and also continuing on microfinance for WASH. So in conclusion, we are really looking to work with the water finance sector on increasing these mechanisms that private sector corporations can invest in, and also to help identify those innovative mechanisms that will make that easier. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Going back to the private commitment to WASH and water policies, can you identify different behaviors between continents or regions? Do you think in some region private sector is more committed to water than others, or not?
It's a coalition of a number of companies, so it's not all companies, and they've identified 100 of the most water-stressed basins, where they have operations in common. And so this is important. This is a strategic investment for them, and therefore, companies are willing to put money on the table, and they need to do that for their own operations. So I think that's a really important and interesting for the attracting of private sector capital into water. So So 100 water stress basins. The CEO Water Mandate has worked together, WWF and WR and the water community to identify where those 100 the most water stress basins are, and then we've aligned that with the corporate operations and supply chains of the companies involved in the initiatives, and they're already underway with projects in several basins. I believe it's up to 15 now, so a long way to go to 100. But also they're investing alongside that and interested in innovative ways where they can invest, and companies investing now with their return will provide those benefits over the long term.
Okay, thank you very much, Cheryl. I'm afraid we ran out of time, so we don't have, we will not have a space for Q&A. So if you want to know or want to get further information from any one of our panelists, maybe you will remain here in this salon to talk directly to them. Thank you very much for sharing with us your knowledge, and I will pass the floor to Xavier, who is going to do the wrap up of this session. Please. Thank you, Xavier.
Well, thanks very much for the invitation. Thank you for your patience. I'll try to be short before you can break. Financing water, this has been an ongoing conversation for years. It was very interesting and encouraging this morning to see that there has been some progress. First, there is a full room. That may seem obvious to you, but I remember 10 or 15 years ago, you could hardly seat 50 people in Stockholm to talk about financing water. Now this is part of a seminar. So, this is the first session. There will be 2 other sessions on the same theme in the coming days. So that's very encouraging. It's also a much more diverse room. 10 years ago, we would have IFIs, public utilities, and that's it. Now we have the corporate sector. We have other actors, also serious in the room. So the people who talk to investors, they are so critical in this conversation. I also think the conversation is much more practical. We are able to build on instruments that have been developed, that are operating. The issue remains about scaling up, replicating. We know this. I'll come back to that in a minute. I still think the discussion is very much focused on water supply and sanitation. Keep in mind that SDG6 is beyond water supply and sanitation. It's also about water for food, water security, flood droughts, and that's still part of the agenda. A very interesting development, which we at the OECD we certainly welcome, is this attention to the enabling environment. Tom made a very apt presentation of this enabling environment. There are 2 things I would like to emphasize here. One is that with the enabling environment, transaction costs are lower. So it's easier to make transactions. It's easier and faster, and it's cheaper to make deals that will contribute to financing water-related projects. So that's one point. The other point is, so there is a return. That's the point. Spending a little bit of time and a little bit of money trying to set up the enabling conditions, the policy reform, the institutional reforms, that pays back. And that pays back seriously in terms of real money and the capacity to implement transactions. The second point I wanted to make about the enabling environment is that, as Tom said, it goes beyond water. There are 3 dimensions of the enabling environment. One is the overall policy framework for investment, which means that if we're serious about attracting more money for water, we need to talk to the people who are in charge of the policy framework for investment. But we also need to reach out to the people who work on energy, urban development, food and agriculture. They are the ones who make the big decision that will affect our capacity to invest in water security, water services, and beyond. So we welcome this attention to the enabling environment, which can have very concrete and positive consequences. Still, I would like to highlight 2 points or raise 2 issues. One, we all agree that it's all about enabling. It's all about blending. It's all about public and private. But we should not ignore that there are still very practical issues. We didn't talk about risk so much. We didn't talk about debt. We talk about blending finance as if IFIs were able to take more risk to finance water. Is this true? We spoke about public finance as if ministers of finance today were able to allocate more money for water. Is this true in a context where they are heavily indebted and they're trying actually to retreat from some of these public investments? France also referred that a very short portion of blended finance goes to water. So there must be water specific issues. At the OECD, we have published a report on that trying to identify and characterize what are these water specific barriers that need to be overcome if you want a water project to attract blended finance, just as renewable energy or other projects, which means that the water community itself still has some homework to do to make sure that it can definitely attract that kind of finance. The point, if we're serious about considering risks, debts, and this macroeconomic or macrofinance environment and how it affects water finance, we have to engage with global discussions on the global finance architecture. The Bridgestone Initiative, I mean, that kind of forum, this is really critical. Otherwise, there is a risk that our discussion on blended finance and related issues remain quite abstract and doesn't actually materialize at scale. The second point I wanted to make is, so we understand what the water community can do. Still, one missing element here is how do we build coalitions for action? And that goes beyond water. I already alluded to that in the context of the enabling environment. But the people who can, if we're serious about synergies, if we're serious about multi-stakeholder platform, cooperation, leverage, we have to engage, we as water community, we have to engage with the institution and partners who can make these things happen. During the session this morning, there were multiple references to national development banks. And I think this is a very interesting network, very interesting development. Putting water on the agenda of these national development banks is a big step forward. One of you referred to the Water Finance Coalition. And I think there is a global network of national development banks. They will meet in 10 days, 2 weeks in Colombia at the Fixed Finance in Common Summit. And I think for the first time, water will feature there explicitly on the agenda of the Finance in Common Summit. So that's a very interesting development. So we need to engage more with these national development banks if you want to build coalitions for action. We need to engage more with investors. And that's where the work of CRES and CDP and others is so critical for this discussion. Moving beyond that, we need to invest with the regulators of the finance industry. So we need to invest. We need to discuss with central banks. The IMF is starting to think more about water. These people have really the capacity to move the needle and make change happen because they can really redirect financing flows that for the moment ignore water and contribute to actually increasing or compounding water-related risks. Final note, the 2 points I just mentioned, so addressing some of these practical issues and building coalitions for action, this is really the ambition of the Global Commission for the Economics of Water, and I'm grateful that France referred to it. Just so you know, for those of you who are not aware, so this Global Commission for the Economics of Water, it's like the Stern Report for water or the Dasgupta Review for water. It was set up as an independent commission last year with a 2-year mandate. It was set up by the government of the Netherlands. The OECD, I mean, I'm not a member. We are facilitating. We are providing secretariat function because this is very much an independent commission. Their role is to contribute to make the case for why investing in water matters. Failing on water means that we'll fail on SDG, we'll fail on climate, we'll fail on food security. That's one of the messages of the Global Commission, and they're providing more robust evidence to that. Their mandate is also to rethink economics. For the moment, mainstream economics are failing us on water. Mainstream economics is unable to capture the values of water and to translate that into messages and policies that can contribute to more investment and better management of water. We did a new concept of justice, because failing on water, not investing enough on water, will affect some communities and people in countries more than others. And a very interesting development in the work of the Global Commission is that they're starting to argue that addressing water issues means new corporate governance. And that's a message for our colleagues from the CEO Water Mandate. Where is she? Oh, she's over there. I think this is a very interesting and practical avenue. The point is that, so this commission has a very ambitious research program. They have a very unique convening power. They can literally have access to anyone in the world to make change happen. So my suggestion to you is to engage with the Global Commission. And the good thing is that there will be a dedicated session on engagement with the Global Commission this Thursday, 2 p.m., room A2. So I hope I will see you there. I won't be on stage because, again, the OECD is not a member. We're just facilitating. But Johan Rockström will be there. Other people will be there to present the mandate, the research program of the Global Commission, and to ignite a discussion with the water community. So again, thanks very much for the organizers for this very inspiring session this morning. There will be follow-up in the context of the SIWI Seminar on water, and I hope to see most of you engaging with the Global Commission this Thursday, 2 p.m., room A2. Thank you.